Hey everyone, welcome to It Tastes Different Gaming. We're going to go back in the past, but for now, I want you to like this video and make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell notifications to stay up to date on all the new videos that we post. What's for dessert? We have the pineapple upside down cake with the Sega Genesis. All right, so we're going to talk about the Sega Genesis, the old 16-bit classic. The Sega Genesis, well, let's talk about the North America. So in North America, it came out August 14th of 1989. And, lasted quite a while. It lasted, say, around, it looks like its lifespan was until 1997, according to Wiki. But, it was a great system competing with Nintendo. Sega does when Nintendo don't. Remember that line? So, the Sega Genesis and all the Sega, Sega was kind of, competing with the Super Nintendo at the time. That was kind of its competition after Nintendo released the regular Nintendo. Then they came out with Super Nintendo, and Genesis, came to the US, and that was a competition for Super Nintendo. So a lot of the same games were on both systems, but Sega did have a lot of games that Nintendo didn't, and vice versa. And there were a lot of great games on Sega. The Sega Genesis is one of my favorite classic consoles, as well as the Super Nintendo, but we'll talk about that console probably some other time. But today's focus is on the Sega Genesis. So I guess we'll go around the room and just kind of talk about the Sega Genesis, what you liked, what you didn't like, what games you liked, whatever you want to talk about. So, Russ, how about you, buddy? You want to go first? Let's talk about the Sega Genesis. What do you got?
No, we probably have two completely different views of the Genesis between the four of us, me and Shane being just a little bit older, and then with you guys being just a touch younger, like it was in your high school years that Sega Genesis was really prominent. Whereas for us, I mean, like I can remember for me, what's my best memory of Genesis is, of course, Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat 2, I believe it was, if memory serves me right. And I can remember being a freshman in college and getting up at 9 o'clock in the morning and playing that game until 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and skipping every single class in between. That's one of my more memorable things about the Genesis. Of course, I did not get into as many games as you guys. That was my sports time. That's when I found NHL 94, NBA Live 95, Madden 94. I mean, those things like that were just huge for me. EA was just really finding their way for those kind of sports games, and Sega Genesis for me. And so that's why, I mean, I played the crap out of those games. But overall, it was kind of, even though I had a Nintendo, I mean, and I have had an Atari 2600, it was a different level of sporting games. And that's probably what caught my eye on that one was doing that, or was playing those games. And then, the fighting games were getting really, really good on Genesis. So I'll just start with that, and I'll pass it over to my elderly friend as well, Shane, and see what he has to say.
I'm not that eld. Damn it. No, Russ is right. We got a couple years on you too. Nick's the baby of the group. He's still a little wet behind the ear. He's definitely right about the Mortal Kombat. I played Mortal Kombat primarily on Sega because you could get all the fatalities. You could get the blood from the arcades. Could not get it all on Nintendo because Nintendo don't. Ha ha. But when I think of Sega, honestly, everybody thinks of Sonic. Sonic was the mascot. Sonic was the, Sega answer to Nintendo's Mario. I always liked Sonic, but I never understood why, because it was a very simple, complex, or a simple design of gameplay. You go from point A to point B as fast as you can, don't hit a pointy thing. But it was fun. It was constantly trying to improve upon yourself. That was one of those games where high score was all about you. you doing better than the last time. That game just really drilled that out. But if I think Sega, I think Sonic, because that's, it came with the console. And there's plenty of games that Sega brought out to the world at that time that has carried over since. But for me, it's definitely on the Sonic side. You can't go wrong with Sonic until you get to the Dark Hedgehog series thing. That was atrocious, but we'll skip that and stick to Sega Genesis. All right, Pat, what about you, Bev? What's your Sega?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with Sega. I mean, that was, when I was younger, we had Nintendo, and then my grandma bought me a Nintendo, and then my dad bought me a Sega, and I was like, what's this? And obviously he got it with Sonic the Hedgehog, because that's what was big seller when that came out. And then it just got better from there. I mean, I got some great games as a kid with that. I remember to this day playing like Toe Jam and Earl and Earthworm Jim on it. I mean, they were just some great off the wall, funny, weird games that were on the Sega. And, and you went from having like a Nintendo 2-button controller to the 3 buttons. And then, and then eventually, they moved on up to 6 buttons and stuff. But, it just add a new button and you're like, what? A new button? What can I do with this? And, 2 buttons was enough. You didn't know you needed 3 buttons until you got the Sega. You were like, oh, I didn't know what I was missing. I enjoyed the Sega, and I have a lot of memories of playing Sega with my dad and stuff like that, because we played a lot of games together, and he would just back when I was a kid, and we started going to the movie rental places. Sega was huge in the movie rental place. You could go in and rent the Sega cartridge. Nintendo was kind of fading at the point on the rental side here in the US anyway. You could get some Nintendo games, but Sega always had a larger wall of games when we would go in to rent games than they did. And so just looking at all the cool old style art and stuff on the wall, I can remember seeing like the Contra wall art for the game and go, I gotta try this, and lo and behold, it was one of those games where I'm like, screw this game, it's making me mad because it's so hard. There's so many games, and I grew up with Sega, and and I remember all the commercials back in the day with Sega. I know we're talking about the Sega Genesis, but I remember the old magazine articles when Sega started coming out with the Sega CD and the 32X, and it was the little magazine ad with the little kid going, Mommy, what are those consoles doing? And he's like, I'll tell you when you're older, son, because it was just snapping on parts. And Sega was way more prevalent in my childhood, because it came out in the late 80s, which I was about 9 or 10 years old when that came out. So that was way more in my face than Nintendo was. We had Nintendo, but Sega always had, like Shane said, the blood and the stuff that we all wanted in the games, whereas Nintendo was more family focused, and they had great games, but they were just more family focused. Nintendo seemed to have a lot of just general games. And one of my favorite games of all times is a Sega game, and it was General Chaos. It is my favorite. It was a favorite game, and I love it to this day. I'll still play it. It's kind of cheesy now. It's not as good as what I remember, but it's still a very nostalgia title for me, and has a lot of great memories. And so there's just so much I could go on about the Sega, and the Sega probably more than the Nintendo spurred my my love of video games, because I like video games. I had Nintendo, but it was something I played when I went over to grandma's house for the summer because there's nothing else to do at her house. But then I got my Sega at home, and then it just blew up. Nick, what about you, man?
Yeah, truth be known, I didn't actually have a Sega growing up, but my cousin did. My cousin lived next door. So I actually had the Nintendo peripherals, the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and he had all the Genesis stuff. So, and he literally lived next door. So I would walk over there all the time and me and him play Genesis at his house and play all the Genesis games. And then we'd come over to my place and play Nintendo games. And so I definitely grew up around it. I just didn't own one.
You get out. You get out right now, mister. Get out.
All right, I'm leaving. So I do love Genesis. There's a lot of, the things I loved about the Genesis games. I like Sonic and all that. And Echo the Dolphin was always one of my favorites. And I did like Shining Force. I remember he had Shining Force, and I loved that game. And the Phantasy Star was a really good RPG too. that I remember him having and playing over there in Altered Beast, which was always a great game, especially, in the arcades as well. But, those were great games that I loved playing. One of the ones, and we talk about Nintendo and Sega, and how Nintendo didn't have blood. And yeah, I mean, I had Mortal Kombat, and he also had Mortal Kombat. And I loved his version of Mortal Kombat because it had all the blood and everything, and mine didn't. The Nintendo version didn't have any of that stuff. And the Sega version actually looked more like the arcade version than the Super Nintendo version. It looked more like like a home port than the actual arcade, where the Sega looked like an arcade version. So, there was a lot of games like that too. And then there's a lot of games that came out for both systems that were a lot different. Jurassic Park is a good example. Jurassic Park came out for both consoles, and those are two drastically different games. The Jurassic Park on Super Nintendo was like this top down, you go around as Grant and shoot dinosaurs and stuff. And then the Sega one is side scrolling. And it's all side scrolling, and it looks more like detailed, kind of like the movie, the models and everything like that kind of look like pictures for as good as they could do from the movies. Right. So it was a completely different game, both of them hard as heck, but still completely different games. And so it was weird. It was kind of weird to see that, because you would see that with a lot of games that came out for both Sega and Nintendo, is they would have the same game releases, but they would be almost completely different from one another, in maybe some small ways or even bigger ways. One of my all-time favorites, Pat talks about his Commander Chaos. Mine was Chikan, the Forever Man. So this one right here, this was my favorite Sega Genesis game, because that and eSWAT, which I have eSWAT right here as well. eSWAT, or Chikan, didn't mean to hit the mic there. Chikan, that game was hard. I mean, you're talking about a hard game. I mean, that game, if you ever play it nowadays, like if you have the original cart, it's not a very expensive game. That's like Dark Souls before Dark Souls was even conceived. I mean, that game it will kill you in 2 seconds when you go through a map or something like that. So, but there's a lot of great games on the Sega Genesis, and I remember, like I said, going over there and playing a ton of them, because he had, and I grew up through the years with him having that too. I didn't get my first Sega till Dreamcast, but he had all the things. He had the, when we're not talking about it this time, but he had the 3DO, the Sega CD, he had the Sega Saturn, he had everything Sega, basically. So I just go over there and play it all, and when Sega CD played Sewer Shark and all that stuff, so I grew up with both consoles. And yeah, I absolutely love the Sega, but I didn't find myself wanting to purchase it because I could just go next door and play it, and he had usually a plethora of Sega games that I could just play through. But it's a great console. It's still a great console today. There's still a lot of great games. If you can't pick up the original Sega, which you can, if you find a mom and pop shop, you could pretty much buy one. They're usually pretty cheap, but you could always go for the Sega Mini, the Sega Mini, just like Nintendo did with the little mini consoles that you hook up to your HDTV. There's a lot of great games on that Sega Mini. A lot of great, not all the great ones, but a lot of great ones from the Sega Genesis era that you could play if you're jonesing to play some Sega Genesis games. So, yeah, absolutely love that console. It's still a great one to this day.
Yep, the Mini's really good. I mean, I own the Mini too. I picked it up and it was like $80. I think I got it on sale. I don't think I paid $80 for it, but I mean, you can't beat that for $80. Even if you had to pay full price. I think you told me you
paid like 50 or 60 for it because you were like super hyped that you picked it up.
Yeah, because I couldn't get one at first. And like Nick said, I will point out, the Sega came out at the time that Nintendo was pushing the Super Nintendo, the SNES, and Sega was outselling the Super Nintendo. It's funny how things work out because Sega doesn't make consoles anymore, but Nintendo still does. But at the time, I guess over in the US, I should say the US, because in Japan they didn't do the Genesis, they had the Master System, but over here in the US, Sega was outpacing Nintendo like crazy. Like they were, the 16-bit console market was Sega Genesis. And for some reason, for whatever happened, They made some bad business practices and are no longer a console manufacturer today. They still make games, but they don't make consoles or anything. So it's funny how how things change. Because I mean, they were huge in my childhood, and now they're not around anymore. You know, they're not around as a console maker, I should say.
They made really bad decisions with their predecessors to the Genesis. You know, the attachment system they had set up was kind of, it was like the Wii to the Wii U. It was marketing. People were like, what the hell is this? And then, they went to the Saturn, which was if I remember right, wasn't the Saturn one like, okay, we're releasing it now. And people were like,
yes,
where's my wallet? But they didn't have any games. The developers were like, what the hell? We're not ready. And all that. And
retailers were like,
yes,
we need to put these on the shelves now.
Yeah, exactly. Retailers are flipping out. Developers are flipping out. It was just, there were some bad decisions, probably with good intentions, but bad decisions that killed them. And that sucked too, because I know we're talking about Sega Genesis, but it was beginning to one of my favorite systems of all time, the Dreamcast. And it sucked that Sega made the mistakes that they did. But they started off strong, like you were saying, Pat. They were outselling Nintendo, who basically owned the market in the U.S. I mean, in the Sega, what made them so popular was you're getting the arcade games. You're not getting watered down bull crap. You're getting arcade games. And you're getting better versions of games. The Aladdin game was better on Sega than it was Nintendo, because it was two different versions. And there was another one like that too, that was like two completely different ones as well. But Sega, just when they came out, they were on fire. They were making all the right decisions, saying all the right things, and they they screwed up. They made too many big mistakes after the fact, and it sucks. But they ushered in a lot of fantastic games that are still around. Russell, what's another game from your childhood there on the Sega that was like, I'm hoping to see if anybody says my favorite game on there on the Sega. But what's another one that's just, ooh, I love that one.
I doubt that I'm going to have anything on your list, but let me take a moment, because I was trying not to interrupt everybody, because I didn't want us to gloss over something. Nick hit something on the head so well with Sega Genesis versus other consoles. The arcade games, the games that we played in the arcade game, we could now own them and play them as much as we wanted. Like, I think that's a huge thing with the Genesis that we didn't see with other consoles. Yeah, I think Nintendo and then Super Nintendo had a couple of SNEK games or SNK games. I can't remember what they were, but like the baseball stars, like they had some of those. But Genesis had things like Altered Beast. That was a hugely popular arcade game. Afterburner 2. Afterburner and Afterburner 2 were like, I mean, every time I saw Afterburner 2, I'm playing that in the arcade every time. Mortal Kombat was no one, and there's probably a slew of them that if I Googled and looked, I could tell you which ones, and you guys probably already know. I think that was a huge benefit to the Sega Genesis versus the Nintendo, because the Nintendo versions never seemed to port those arcade games the way that Genesis did. And so the other game I was going to say, Shane, was Afterburner 2. I think I burned that cartridge out. I played, Patrick knows I love flight simulators, or at least I love combat simulators when it comes down to it. That was one of my favorites. I mean, that, and then what was it, Top Gun back in the day, that we had the original Top Gun. I mean, those two there were awesome. So, but what about, let's go back to you, Shane, with that question. Like, what about you?
Oh, well, I'm just going to go ahead and get my favorite out there another way. Sonic is the answer to Sega, but my favorite Sega Genesis was Comic Zone. It was like, I'm in a comic. I'm going page to page, and I'm fighting comic book stuff. I mean, in my brain, it was like the greatest thing ever. And even today, it still looks fantastic, in my opinion. They had the dot. I can't think of the art style on it. It's the dot print. But I mean, you could see that in the game. It was fantastically done. It was a hard game, but it was fantastic. That is my end all be all favorite Genesis game. I mean, by far. And I love a lot of Genesis games. What about you, Pat?
Well, better whip out your iced tea then. Because in that game, iced tea was how you got health, rather than mushrooms and rings and stuff like that. Gotta get your iced tea.
Not the wrapper. Not the wrapper.
Yep, played that one. Right. And not the hard tea neither. Beating people down in the canteen.
Patrick's going to mention a game that we all love. I'm going to interrupt him real quick and say, I just missed Stargate. Stargate was, and for those that don't know, Stargate was an extremely failed video game for the Genesis.
Not on the level of Atari failed, but yeah, I know exactly where.
No ET level fail.
But very, very, I mean, almost that level fail.
Right. But you guys were mentioning all the arcade games, but I mean, like Altered Beast that you guys had mentioned. And then, why did I just blank out the,
Golden Axe.
Golden Axe. Yep. Yeah. Golden Axe on there. Golden Axe 2 and stuff. So, I mean, those were great games. And then Shinobi series and stuff that were coming out on there. I mean, you cannot go wrong. You couldn't go wrong when I was a kid. I would think, I mean, I could still picture it in my head going into the video game rental stores and seeing the wall of Sega games and the wall of Super Nintendo games and just going, what can I play over the weekend? Because that was a routine when I was a kid. I lived with my dad and we had very set schedules because Dad was very much this by the book. This is what you do on this day and this day. And I knew every week, Sundays we ate at Denny's, Wednesday we had Pizza Hut, and Fridays we went to the movie store. And we would go to the video store and he would let me get a game if I was good. If I'd been good that week, I could get a game and some, candy and a drink. And we would get a game and I would play it all weekend long. And he would take it back on when he'd go back into work on Monday. So I remember that, and just going into those video game rental stores and just, what am I going to play this weekend? So they have, I don't know how my life would have been if I didn't have a Sega, because what would I have done? I mean, my parents were big into movies, but I was big into video games, and I just couldn't get enough video games in my life when I was that age. Play anything and everything I could. Like I said, as soon as Sega Genesis hit my life, everything that came after it, I had to have. I had the 32X attachment. I had the Sega CD attachment. I got a Sega Saturn. I got a Dreamcast. I got all that stuff as they were coming out. And it was, and Nintendo, I had all of it. I mean, I got a Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64. But and to be honest with you, I don't remember a whole lot of the Nintendo 64 and the Super Nintendo games that I had besides Mario and stuff. But on the Sega side, I remember so many titles and so many multiplayer titles, like, the Contra stuff and all that, having your buddy over to play games like Toe Jam and Earl, where you run around with you and a buddy, just the crude humor of Toe Jam and Earl. You would never find anything like that on Nintendo.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say, Pat, because you brought it up twice now, and I was thinking about it. I think Sega basically invented the term shovelware, because they did have a ton more games. You're absolutely right. Because I remember the video store that I would rent from, it was a little mom and pop, had a built-in bar and a billiards place. They had 1-2 shelves of Nintendo, but they'd have 3 or 4 of the Sega. Yeah, I never even thought about that till you said that. But yeah, there's a lot more of them Sega games out there. I wonder if you could find a count on how many they made.
Well, I know that like when Nintendo was first out, Nintendo was the big dog. I mean, they were unseating Atari is what they were doing, and then Sega came out at the same time that Nintendo was pushing their SNES, the 16-bit System Wars, basically. And from what I understand, it was a 2-to-1. Like there was a 2-to-1 game ratio, like 2 Sega games for every 1 Nintendo game. And at some point, I'd even heard it got as high as 4-to-1 when they first came out. But I remember just seeing I remember going into the video game section of the rental place when we were kids, and like a whole one wall. So a third of this room where games was at was Sega games. And then you had your Nintendo and Super Nintendo were on a side together, and I was like, what's going on here? And then some of the Nintendo spilled onto the other wall, but it was mostly Sega games. And they had so many, and I played a lot of them, I don't remember having as much problem. I know everybody talks about how bad it was back in the day, but everybody remembers when a cartridge doesn't work, what do? You blow on it and you bang it. I never had that much problem with the Sega. It was just like drop it in and go. But the Nintendo, it's like you got to push it in, push it down. And sometimes you stick a second cartridge in there to hold it down because that seemed to work. And the Sega always just seemed like a no fuss type thing. The cartridge just slaps on top of it. And, and you very rarely had issues. But I liked my Sega. Played a lot of it. The thing took some abuse. I mean, I controllers, the controller, like I said, you never knew you needed 3 buttons until the games came out. And you're like, I got an A, B, and C button now, whereas all I had was an A and B button before. And then, eventually they morphed into a 6-button controller and then a 6-button with bumpers and stuff like that for the newer, once you got into this 32 and 64-bit systems. But Sega just had the Sega is more front in my mind than Nintendo ever was when I was a kid. Just because I had the Nintendo, but like I said, it was a secondary thing that I did at my grandma's house during the summertime, because Nintendo didn't live with me at my parents' house. It was at my grandma's house because she bought it for me there and I play on it there. But when I came home, it was all about Sega and and stuff like that. And my dad was a big gamer too, to some extent, because when I was younger and he was in the military, he used to go guard duty, and I'd wake up some mornings and my TV and Sega would be gone. And Mom like, well, Dad had guard duty. He took the console and the TV, so he'd have something to do. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? So I have a lot of fond memories of Sega, a lot more game knowledge and breadth in Sega than I did Nintendo. But and I think Sega had a way more impact on my gaming childhood than Nintendo did.
I feel like there's one thing though that Sega, I don't know, I could be wrong, and this could lead to a small debate, but I feel like Sega made EA, and so innately Shane should hate the Sega Genesis just a little bit, because I think, didn't EA have like exclusivity rights there for a while with Sega? Like all the games EA made only went to Sega.
If I remember correctly, you're absolutely right. One of Nintendo's reasons they didn't have the game volume Sega did is Nintendo had I'm trying to think of the fancy word they used for it. Basically, that was a quality control. They wanted quality controls over every game to be available under the system. Sega, like I said, a little shovelware going on, and that was fine. But I think people were better about trying to make good games instead of EA shoveling dog crap. But yeah, I think you are correct though, Russ, because I don't remember playing because I played NHL back in the day. I played every freaking game back in the day. So, but I believe you're right. Madden, NHL,
they had every sports
all
game,
of those,
but they had
they had women's tennis.
Blood of Vengeance. But they had some other games too, like Blood of Vengeance, and another I can't think off the top of my head that was a game similar to that. But I mean, I played like Bill Walsh, NCAA football '95. Arnold Palmer's golf.
Yes.
Oh my God, it just popped into my head as I'm sitting here talking about it. Like that was my sporting error was with Genesis and stuff like that. And so I kind of wish I would have played stuff like Nick played. I mean, I think I might have had a little bit of appreciation for RPGs a little bit sooner, because some of the games that he talks about when it comes to this fondness of those games, I'm like, man, I should have tried that back in the day. I probably would have liked it.
Yeah. That's one thing everybody here can say is Sega had probably a wider breadth of games in an overall capacity of genres than Nintendo ever tried to push out. But that's what made that era great, because Nintendo made Sega try harder to beat Nintendo. As Sega was beating Nintendo, Nintendo tried harder to come back, which makes it great for all gamers. And that's one thing I think we miss nowadays. I think we have issues with the new consoles than we did back in the old consoles. I think we had more people trying to bring out quality products, quality games back then. But Nick, what is the game that you wish you had still right now from Sega days? You still wish you had the little cartridge to stare at and show the camera for us right now.
I don't. Well,
You have
I mean,
every
if I
freaking
had
thing,
it,
anyways. But give us a.
No, I don't. If I had a game from the Sega Genesis era that I'd like to have like complete in box and be able to show off would be Castlevania Bloodlines, or maybe Contra Hardcore. One of my favorite games too was Wonder Boy and Monster World. I loved that game back on Sega Genesis, which I think is on the little mini box. So if you really wanted to play it, you could play it on there. But that was one of my favorites back then too. So, but if I were to have one complete in box, it would be either Contra or Castlevania. Probably Castlevania more because I'm a bigger Castlevania guy. But yeah.
So Russ brought up the whole EA Sega thing, and I will basically say that EA became what they are because of Sega, but it wasn't under like nice pretenses. EA basically reverse engineered Sega's system so that they could because Sega had what EA claimed was an unfair licensing practice back in the day to where how they licensed their games. So EA went and created this clean room environment. And I can't remember what they called it. I remember reading about it way back when, but basically they took Sega's console, reverse engineered it, like everything reverse engineered from the game manuals on, like all of it, so that they could basically create games. And they basically bullied Sega into meeting their licensing demand and requirements. And for anybody that knows anything about this, EA actually marked all of their cartridges so that you could tell them apart from the Sega cartridges.
Yeah, they had that little yellow tab.
Yeah, exactly.
Yellow thing on it.
Yep.
Those were EA cartridges, and they did that because they were gonna put out their own licensing model to compete with Sega's. And so, but Sega decided that it was better to go with them rather than legal battles and all that other kind of crap. But EA is still the dirtbag company back then that they are today. There you go. There's the EA
Jungle
tag.
Strike. Holy crap,
So that's how
man! There's a
that
flashback. God.
Right. So, it's there's a lot of history there, a lot of good and bad things, and and there's a whole lot of history there. And I'm surprised that Nick didn't bring up something that, Sega spawned an online service, and I probably let Nick talk about the online service because he's the one that was initially talking about it earlier. But Sega had online services, and depending on where you live, it was called something different. And in the US, because I really had no experience with that, we didn't have any of that. Nick, you remember what that online service was that Sega had in the US?
It was the Sega Channel.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the Sega Channel, but I had a friend that had it. And I remember seeing it once because I went over to his house because Sega Channel didn't, well, I mean, not just Sega Channel, but the whole idea, especially in the US for sure, did not last very long. I think I guess, so according to this, it came out in 94 and it lasted until 98. So, I mean, that's not too bad. But yeah, it was basically, so according to this, you had to have Time Warner Cable. And through that, you would get, it was kind of pretty much a pay-to-play service. So you could play Genesis games online. You play like game demos, get cheat codes. It's kind of like Sega having a website, back in the day, really. So you could get like, cheat codes and strategy guides. You could play demos of games. And I think they did have some full games on there, maybe like Sonic or something like that. I remember seeing it at my buddy's house, but I was really young and I only saw it once. And I remember him booting it up and showing me, and we played something on there. I don't remember what it was, but, and I don't think he had it much longer after that because I don't think there was a lot that was added into it, if I remember right. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of pioneers in that way, in a sense, trying to go a little far ahead in the future than they've always done that, though. The Sega Dreamcast was the first one to have an Ethernet port on the back, right? Or it had a
phone jack
on the back, right? Yeah, and the phone jack on the back. So, and they were the first one to, the other consoles had done that as like a peripheral add-on, but they had one actually inside the console itself. And then, I remember that was my first foray really into online gaming, and my first MMO that I played, which was Phantasy Star Online. And I played the crap out of that, man. So, from there, that really opened my mind to MMOs because I had never played one beforehand. I was always interested in them, but that was the first one I played. And then from there, I was like, I got to play them all now. So I got to check out these other ones. But Yeah, and, Sega, and even with the Dreamcast, you got the VMUs, right? The little memory cards that had the screen on them, and
they were fantastic.
I remember playing
those things. I wish they would have never got away from it.
Yeah,
and not to cut you off, but Sonic, you could raise an egg and watch it hatch right on your little VMU. You could take it with you, and then Resident Evil Code Veronica. That's where your lifeline and stuff was. You could monitor your health. I freaking love that thing. The Sega has always been ahead of the game, too far damn ahead. That's been their biggest problem. Is they're thinking, there you go. That's my little baby right there. Tell me you got an egg in it.
I don't. I have Sonic Adventure, but I haven't tried to raise the.
What the hell is wrong with you, boy? Get on there and raise that damn egg.
I don't know if I could do that again. I mean, I did as a kid, but nowadays I'd probably forget about it and die. I'm not very good with the Tamagotchis nowadays.
But yeah, I mean, the Sega Channel was the U.S. version. I think in Japan they called it like what was it, Sega Network or something weird like that. But basically, they would put 50 to 70. They would put 50 to 70 games on that system that you could download and play at a time, and they would just rotate them out. And they updated it like every other week or a monthly, depending on what was going on. But could you imagine that? I mean, we have that today with Game Pass. You have a subscription, but this was back in the 90s, guys. I mean, they've always been like ahead of themselves, because we often bring up the Dreamcast as ahead of its time, and that's why it died, because I really do think it was ahead of its time. It's a great console. And then, Sega, the Sega Channel was ahead of its time, in my opinion, because you used to also get game demos, like games that were coming out. You could download the demos of them, and it's just, I don't know, it's and get cheat codes, like you said, stuff like that. It was just an amazing system. It also won like a Popular Science or Popular Mechanics Best of What's New when it came out back in the day. I remember hearing about it, but my parents were not big into letting me as a kid have a game subscription service. They would have been like, no. You're not paying. We're not paying for you to have a subscription service. I think it's just, I think they only ever got up to like 250,000 subscribers, but I think that's pretty good for back in the day. But I think they killed it off because they were expecting to get like 1 million plus subscribers in the first year is what they were shooting for. So really great thing. It just too early. Too early, in my opinion. I cannot imagine. I mean, the games were probably small. They were pretty small back then. But can you imagine having to download a Sega game over dial-up?
I never had dial-up. I went straight to DSL. And I don't know, years later, my DSL went out, and the internet comes like, well, we can get you the dial-up till we get it fixed. I'm like, okay. I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't know it was going to be that bad. And this is just trying to web browse. So I could not imagine trying to download or stream or do anything with that crap. So Sega is definitely, Sega was on a 20-year plan when technology was only at 5, so they needed to slow down. And if they would have, they'd still be in one of the top console makers and developers.
Man, poor Shane. Never had internet until the late 90s.
Dude, I would go to the library to find cheat codes from like Game Informer and crap, because, I didn't have it.
I always remember going into like if you were playing a game, you go into like Walmart or whatever, and you go to the magazine rack, and then you would look for the game, like the code. You're looking for cheat codes or a strategy or whatever. I would find it in the book, and then write it down on a piece of paper. And
walking into
because that's just what I
walking
needed
into Walmart, pad of paper, pencil. Hell yeah!
But the internet, man, I mean, great. I can't believe Shane. I really figured you would have had internet before the late 90s.
No, I never put the internet. Never put much thought into it. And the only reason I ever got internet was to play games. That was it. I mean, that was my reasoning for it. Me and my ex, we were like, okay, Sony's coming out with their adapter. Xbox is coming out with, their online system. So we're getting internet. And we went and bought some like cheap internet browsing computer from Walmart under clearance aisle just to have another reason to have a damn internet. And
you got 500 hours of AOL for free.
No, I went DSL.
What are you talking about? I had like 1,200 of those. That's how I had
Those discs,
I had like probably 700 Yahoo emails. I mean, like every time I'm registering with a new Yahoo email,
Oh, yeah.
like
I use those.
I lived off
I
those.
used
things.
them as a coasters or
Yeah,
nice
right?
frisbees.
Once they were done. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I can't believe that. I thought you would have had internet earlier than that.
If I would have discovered
yeah,
porn earlier on the internet, I'm sure I would have had it at 9.
Oh, that would have been horrible. That would have been horrible. Line by line of loading a naked picture, and Shane's just like, I finished like 5 minutes ago and it's still loading the picture.
I squinted at Cinemax when it was being buffered, so I can handle that.
As it's loading, he's playing Beat the Clock.
he's like, will it get past her neck before I finish?
Come on, show me a nipple.
That was his version of gaming back in the day. But so yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, but so the Sega, like I said, the Sega's channel thing was pretty interesting. I never had it, never even saw a buddy who had it. Because, when we were kids, most of my friends came over to our house to play video games because we had those games. A lot of other kids, I don't know. It's how times are. Back when I was a kid, video games were the devil, and a lot of parents didn't let their kids play video games, but my parents were like, bring video games. I'd spend hours in the arcade on the weekends and crap. So they were like, well, we just save some money and he could stay here and not have to pump quarters into an arcade.
It's a leave me alone system.
And so,
I mean, it really is.
Pretty much my parents would be like, want a nice quiet weekend. And we'd go to the video game store and they'd be like, here's 2 games. Leave me alone.
That's exactly right.
So Sega, man, I mean, it's a great thing. It spawned a lot of stuff ahead of its time, in my opinion. A lot of stuff ahead of its time. And I kind of miss them I kind of wonder, it's kind of funny to think of things in the future. I mean, how could you imagine if there was still a fourth party in the console wars? If Sega, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo were all still going at it, how that would be, what kind of games we would have? Sega having their own first party studio.
I just don't think we could handle a fourth console. I really don't. I mean, the Atari VCS is coming out.
Well, Shane would be, if there was, Shane would be in his second divorce. So, I mean, that's what ended up, what happened if we had a fourth console.
Oh, I'm still fighting for a PS5.
I mean, I have 3 consoles. And I'm still always looking for something. And if you count my computer, I have 4. I have the Nintendo, the Switch, the Series X, the PS5, and the computer. And I'm still always looking for something to play. So one more thing to keep out of the boredom or whatever, I'm like game for it.
Yeah,
so.
See, I'm the same situation. I've got a PS2, 3, 4, trying to get a 5, all the Xboxes. Far as what would they put out? My God, exclusivities would be going nuts.
You can't even really. You can't even really yet throw in the Atari VCS one yet, because while it's all old games, they are talking about, they have a developer toolkit for people to develop new stuff for it, but it still has no library except old games. There's nothing new coming out on it. So
as long as I can finish ET.
That's I don't think that's on there. they buried that thing a long time ago with that. So like I said, I think they were ahead of their time, and I loved everything they put out, and I consumed everything they got. If I could do, and let's see, we're getting off topic here, but if I could do one Sega Complete, like have a wall of games, it would be a very hard choice for me between the Sega CD and the Sega Saturn. There's something about that big ass blue Sega CD cartridge. I mean, because the thing had a disc in it, but it was like twice the height of the disc and like 10 times as thick, and it just looked great sitting on a shelf. It had all the manuals. Sega is my gaming childhood. So I would, if I could afford it, I'd probably have it, because and me as a collector, I can't deal with loose cartridges. I would want the boxes and everything. And that would be too expensive for me.
Yeah, Nick will be the first one to have that collection. We all know that. I mean, he's halfway there, I think.
But Nick's okay with loose cartridges.
He's not as anal as you, but he would still prefer his shit tight. Pardon my language. Me, I would just love to go back and just play all the old games that I used to love, and then tell Sega, look, here's where you screwed up. Let's slow that down so we can have, the Dreamcast could be round. We could have Dreamcast 3 right now. I would like to have had Sega stay, but they didn't. They screwed up after their greatest system, and that stinks.
Right.
How many? I'd like to have a Sega Saturn, but that Sega Saturn, even on its own, is still expensive.
Yeah, it is.
And all the games are super expensive.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things too was how many. I cannot remember how many versions of the Sega Genesis there was. I remember the old 16-bit one, which had the giant 16-bit on the front, and then the newer one that didn't have the numbers on it, that came with a 6-button controller. That was a 32-bit Sega Genesis, wasn't it? Or was that still a 16-bit console?
I think they were all 16 bits. I want to say they were all just variations. They had up to the Sega Genesis 3, if I remember right, which was just, I believe, just a third remodel of the Genesis itself.
I gotcha.
Third edition remodel.
Yeah, because they had like so you had like the one that had the 16-bit and the one that didn't. Because to get the 32-bit, you had to slap on the 32X. So, cool. I mean, this is just going to be a stroke fest if we keep going on with this, because I love Sega, and I wish they were still around as a console maker. I would still buy their stuff and all that. What about you guys? Anybody got any other final words or any other information they want to pull out? I mean, there's so much history with Sega. I mean, Sega has been in business forever. And then, the first console that they put out, the Sega Genesis they put out, which I guess was the Master System, was back in 88 in Japan, and then North America in 89, we got the Sega Genesis. So,
yeah, I would love to see them bring back Comic Zone. Just because with the graphics we can do today and the popularity of comics now, I think, man, that would be really cool to see another Comic Zone. A new one, not a HD remaster bullcrap.
An HD remaster.
No, I think I agree with Patrick. We could probably go on for a while, because this is thank God we were alive at a time when we got to experience the Sega phenomenon, and we can sit here and talk about it with relative experience with the console. So that's really cool. It was a great system. It was a lot of fun to talk about, and long live Sega.
All right.
Bring me a Sega Dreamcast 2
or a 3.
That never happened. But
all right, yeah, I'll take all of them. So give me every one of the Sega consoles, and then I'll take a library of their games along with it. Okay. New in the box with all the manuals and everything. All right. Well, hopefully everybody enjoyed this trip back in time with Sega Genesis. The 16-bit version of it. And if we didn't mention some of your favorite games, leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought, or what games we may have missed that you thought were great. There's so many of them. There's the pull your hair out of Aladdin and Lion King games, and the super easy fun games, and then the off the wall Toe Jam and Earl games. So there's so many, plethora of history with Sega. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you thought. Let us know the games that you remember from your childhood that were on the Sega 16-bit systems. And we hope to catch you in the next episode.
See ya.